Welcome to Story World. This is the story of a land that was ancient before it was ever called new, and the next 20 minutes will change how you see everything you thought you knew about America. Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine a continent untouched by the modern world. Forests stretching endlessly from one coast to another. Rivers carving their way through towering mountains. Vast plains rolling beneath open skies that no city light had ever dimmed. This land was not empty. It was not waiting. It was not silent. It was alive, breathing, and already home to millions of people who had built their lives, their languages, their laws, and their legacies across every corner of it, long before a single European ship broke the horizon. This is where the American story truly begins. Not in 1776, not in 1492, but here, in the deep and ancient heartbeat of a continent that was already, undeniably and magnificently whole. Forget everything you were taught about an empty wilderness waiting to be discovered. North America was not vacant. It was alive. Hundreds of distinct indigenous nations had already shaped this land for thousands of years. In the northeast, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy governed through a sophisticated political system that some historians believe directly influenced American democracy itself. In the South, the Mississippian people constructed enormous ceremonial mounds that still stand today. In the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans carved entire cities directly into cliffsides. These were not wandering tribes scratching at the earth. These were civilizations. They maintained vast trade networks spanning thousands of miles, developed complex governance systems, cultivated agriculture, and tracked the movements of stars with remarkable precision. And the scale of it all? Estimates suggest that between 50 and 100 million people lived across the Americas before a single European ship ever crossed the Atlantic. Moving south, the scale of civilization only grows more staggering. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, sat on a lake in central Mexico, home to over 200,000 people. Larger than London, larger than Paris, larger than any city in Europe at the time. It had aqueducts carrying fresh water, floating gardens feeding its population, and causeways stretching across the water like stone highways. To the east, the Maya had already built something extraordinary. A mathematical and astronomical tradition so precise they calculated the length of the solar year to within minutes. These were not primitive peoples. These were architects of civilization. The continent breathed with culture, conflict, trade, and invention. But beneath all of it, a tension was gathering that no one on this side of the world could yet feel. This world, so rich, so complex, so alive, was about to collide with something it had never encountered before, and nothing would ever be the same. The year is 1492. Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish crown, crosses the Atlantic believing he has found a shortcut to Asia. He has not. What he has stumbled upon will reshape every corner of the planet. But let us be honest about what that moment meant for the people already living there. Columbus was not a hero to the Taino people of the Caribbean. He was the beginning of their end. Within decades of first contact, the Taino were nearly wiped from existence. Not through one single act, but through a relentless combination of violence, forced labor, and disease that swept through their communities like a fire with no edge. This was not an accident. It was the direct consequence of conquest. And this is not a footnote buried in the back of a history book. This is the foundation. Everything that follows is built on top of it. And then the conquest accelerated. Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico in 1519, and within 2 years, the Aztec Empire had fallen. Francisco Pizarro dismantled the Inca Empire in South America by 1533. These were not negotiations. These were acts of extraordinary brutality, driven by gold, glory, and the cross. Spanish forces destroyed cities, shattered governance systems, and erased centuries of civilization in the span of a generation. But the most devastating weapon was never held in any soldier's hand. It was invisible. European diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, swept through indigenous populations who had no immunity, no defense, and no warning. Entire communities were hollowed out before they ever saw a conquistador's face. Estimates suggest up to 90% of some populations perished. The continent was not conquered by swords alone. It was emptied by plague, and the silence left behind made everything that followed possible. Spain moved first on the mainland. In 1565, they founded St. Augustine in Florida, the oldest permanent European settlement in what would become the United States. England followed, but stumbled. The Roanoke colony of 1587 vanished without explanation, leaving behind only a single carved word, Croatoan. Then came Jamestown in 1607, England's first permanent foothold in North America. It nearly died before it could live. Starvation reduced settlers to desperate measures. Disease swept through the fort. Conflict with the Powhatan Confederacy turned every day into a fight for survival. Of the original 500 colonists, fewer than 60 survived the winter of 1609 to 1610. And yet, they held on. In that stubborn survival, something was quietly taking root. Because the next wave of settlers arriving on these shores would not come just for land or gold. They would come for God, and that belief arrived in 1620. A group of religious separatists, exhausted by persecution and desperate for a place to worship freely, boarded a small, overcrowded vessel called the Mayflower. They crossed the Atlantic through brutal conditions, and when they finally reached land, it was not where they had planned. They arrived on the shores of what is now Massachusetts, cold, unfamiliar, and unforgiving. But before a single person stepped off that ship, something remarkable happened. They wrote an agreement, the Mayflower Compact, simple in language, revolutionary in spirit. It declared that the people aboard, ordinary men, would govern themselves through just and equal laws of their own making. No king handed this down, no crown authorized it. The people decided. It was a small document, barely a paragraph, but inside it lived a crack in the wall of monarchy. And that crack, over the next 150 years, would widen into a revolution that shook the entire world. From that crack in the wall, something vast began to grow. By the mid-1700s, 13 British colonies stretched along the eastern seaboard, each carrying its own identity. Puritan New England built its towns around faith and discipline. The middle colonies thrived on trade and diversity. The South organized itself around land, labor, and profit. But life in these colonies was never equal. It was stratified, brutal, and deeply divided. Slavery had taken root. In the southern colonies, tobacco and rice plantations ran entirely on the forced labor of enslaved Africans, human beings stripped of every freedom the colonists were beginning to celebrate in their speeches and pamphlets. The narrator does not look away from this. The ideals of liberty being born in these colonies existed directly alongside one of history's most savage systems of human bondage. That contradiction was not a footnote. It was the foundation, and it would define America for centuries to come. After the French and Indian War ends in 1763, Britain is drowning in debt. The solution seems simple to the British Crown. Make the colonies pay. But the colonists have a problem with that. A very serious problem. The Stamp Act of 1765 taxes paper. The Townshend Acts of 1767 tax glass, paint, and tea. Every new law arrives without a single colonial voice in Parliament. No representation, just obligation. Then comes the Boston Massacre in 1770. British soldiers firing into a crowd on a winter street. Then the Boston Tea Party in 1773, colonists hurling British tea into the harbour rather than pay another penny. Each event is a match struck in a room filling with gunpowder. The colonists are not yet calling for independence, but they are learning a word. Quietly at first, then louder, then with absolute fury. That word is liberty. Act 4 begins, Revolution and the Founding, April 19th, 1775. The first shots of the Revolutionary War are fired at Lexington and Concord. No one is entirely sure who fired first. Historians still debate it. But the result is undeniable. 13 colonies are now at war with the most powerful military empire on Earth. The narrator shifts into war film mode. The Continental Army, led by General George Washington, is outgunned, underfunded, and constantly on the edge of collapse. Soldiers march without boots. Supplies run dry for weeks at a time. Desertion is a daily threat. Morale fractures under the weight of impossible odds. But the army does not collapse. It keeps moving. It keeps fighting. And that, in itself, is one of history's most remarkable facts. That a ragged collection of colonists dared to stand against an empire and somehow refused to fall. Bunker Hill, June 1775. Colonial militiamen dug into the hillside and held their ground against the most disciplined army on Earth. They lost the hill, but they proved something that changed everything. They could fight. Then came Valley Forge, the winter of 1777 to 1778. Washington's army had no shoes, no food, and no warmth. Men died not from bullets, but from cold and starvation. And yet, they did not break. Yorktown, 1781. A combined American and French force surrounded British General Cornwallis, cutting off every escape. He surrendered. The war was effectively over. Washington, writing to his troops through those years of suffering, called their perseverance little short of a standing miracle. That miracle did not happen on one battlefield. It happened across years of impossible endurance, forged by ordinary men who refused to quit. July 4th, 1776. Thomas Jefferson takes a quill and writes words that will echo through centuries. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The narrator pauses here, because the pause is necessary. Jefferson owned over 600 enslaved people across his lifetime. The Declaration was not a description of America as it was. It was a promise America made to itself, one it would spend the next 2.5 centuries struggling to keep. That tension is not a footnote. It is the entire story. The Constitution follows in 1787, establishing the framework of government. The Bill of Rights arrives in 1791, protecting individual freedoms. And the young republic elects its first president, George Washington, who steps down after 2 terms, setting a precedent of peaceful transfer of power that still defines the office today. And then, America started moving west. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States overnight. President Thomas Jefferson paid approximately $15 million for roughly 828,000 square miles of land that France had no true right to sell, because millions of indigenous people already lived there. Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark westward to map it. But this was not undiscovered country. It was home. The ideology of manifest destiny soon took hold. The belief that American expansion from coast to coast was not just inevitable, but divinely ordained. God himself, the argument went, had reserved this continent for American civilization. The narrator will not let that stand unchallenged. For every mile of westward expansion, there was displacement, violence, and broken treaties. The Trail of Tears. In 1838, when the Cherokee Nation was forcibly marched from their homeland, killing thousands, remains one of history's starkest examples of what expansion truly cost. By 1860, nearly 4 million enslaved people lived in the United States. This was not a political abstraction. These were human beings, stripped of freedom, family, and dignity, to sustain an economy built on their suffering. The abolitionist movement was rising, and no voice carried more force than Frederick Douglass. Born into slavery, he escaped and became one of the most powerful orators in American history. In 1852, he stood before an audience and asked a question that cut straight through the nation's pride. What, to the American slave, is your 4th of July? It is a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. Those words did not just challenge a holiday, they challenged the entire American identity. The tension was becoming unbearable. Something was about to break, and then it breaks. In April 1861, Confederate forces opened fire on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. 11 Southern states have seceded from the Union, and their own secession declarations leave no ambiguity. Slavery was the cause, not states' rights in the abstract. Slavery. The war that follows is the bloodiest in American history. 4 years of brutal, grinding combat kills an estimated 620,000 to 750,000 Americans, more than every other American war combined up to that point. Brothers fight brothers. Entire generations are swallowed by battlefields. But in November 1863, standing over a fresh cemetery at Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln reframes everything. This war, he says, is a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal can survive. The nation is listening. The world is watching. April 9th, 1865. Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse. The Union has held. The 13th Amendment has abolished slavery forever. But 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln is shot at Ford's Theater and dies the following morning. The man who guided the nation through its darkest chapter never sees what comes next. The war is over, but the question it was fought over, what America truly means, remains dangerously unanswered. 4 million people are now free. Free in name. But freedom without land, without legal protection, without political power, is a fragile and easily broken thing. The nation is about to enter Reconstruction, one of its most contested, consequential, and ultimately unfinished chapters. The decisions made in the years ahead will not stay in the past. They will travel forward, quietly shaping laws, lives, and fault lines that Americans are still standing on today. Reconstruction collapses. The political will to protect formerly enslaved people crumbles under organized racial terror and Southern resistance. Jim Crow laws rise in slavery's place. Separate water fountains, separate schools, separate futures. Freedom had been declared, but equality was being systematically dismantled. And yet, simultaneously, something extraordinary is happening. America is industrializing at a breathtaking pace. The Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869, stitching the continent together with iron and ambition. Steel mills, oil refineries, and factories reshape the economy from the ground up. Waves of immigrants pour in, from Ireland, Italy, Eastern Europe, China, building railroads, filling factories, reshaping culture. In 1886, the Statue of Liberty rises in New York Harbor, torch held high above the words, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free." 2 Americas are being built at once, and both are real. The 20th century arrives, and America can no longer stay on the sidelines. By 1917, the United States enters World War I, tipping the balance toward the Allies and announcing itself as a global force. Then comes the Roaring '20s, jazz filling the air, prosperity flowing, culture exploding with energy. But in 1929, the Great Depression crashes everything. Banks fail, millions starve, the dream fractures. Then, World War II ignites across Europe. On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, and America enters the fight with everything it has. D-Day, the Pacific Theater. Island by island, the war grinds forward. Then, in August 1945, atomic bombs fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The military calculation was cold. The human cost was catastrophic. Tens of thousands dead in seconds. The war ends. The world reorganizes itself. And standing at the center of that new world, more powerful than any nation in history, is the United States of America. The Cold War defines the second half of the 20th century. 2 superpowers, America and the Soviet Union, locked in a decades-long standoff, neither willing to blink. Proxy wars burn across Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Nuclear missiles sit ready, pointed at cities full of ordinary people. The tension is constant, suffocating, and real. Then on July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong steps onto the surface of the moon. 600 million people watch. For one extraordinary moment, the entire world holds its breath together. But back on Earth, America is fighting a different kind of battle. The civil rights movement is tearing open the nation's oldest wound. Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat. Martin Luther King Jr. stands before hundreds of thousands and speaks of a dream. Millions of ordinary Americans march, sit in, and bleed for a promise their country made, but never kept. The arc bends, slowly, painfully, but it bends. What does the American story say about us? About humanity's capacity for both greatness and catastrophe? It says that a nation can be built on breathtaking ideals and breathtaking cruelty at the exact same time. That the men who wrote "all men are created equal" could enslave hundreds of people without apparent contradiction. That a country can absorb wave after wave of suffering, division, and reinvention, and somehow keep moving. Progress here was never guaranteed, never finished, and never free. People bled for every inch of it. What this story ultimately reveals is something far larger than one nation. It reveals what humans do when handed both freedom and power simultaneously. The most powerful force in recorded history is not an army, not an economy. It is an idea, stubbornly held, fought for, and passed forward through generations. If this story moved you, subscribe to StoryWorld. More history is coming.